I see you now. You're muted though.
And now?
Now I hear you. God, I was having heart palpitations because this is the first time I've used Team over Zooms, and I was like, shit, am I going to have loads of people joining and then technical issues, which would have been sod's law, you know?
Teams.
Yeah, teething issues, isn't it? Yeah. The Microsoft meetup, which now finally uses Teams, and then it goes wrong. But
I'd have to happen.
Yeah, I'm sure Microsoft are using Zoom internally anyway, aren't they? Because Microsoft don't even use some of their own products sometimes. They're using React Native instead of Xamarin for all their web stuff. So it's like, for their mobile stuff rather.
The amount of different stuff they have is unreal.
Yeah, I can imagine. How are you, more importantly, now you're finally logged on?
Not too bad. It's been interesting. I did a full tech check yesterday because I had a laptop die on me last week, the day before I went on vacation. Oh, wow. So I'm using a different laptop that I've not logged into stuff yet. And yesterday I had my monitors working, my camera working, my sound working, my studio lights worked, and it's like, I'm good to go. And then this afternoon I came upstairs and neither of my monitors worked. My camera didn't want to connect. I've just blown 2 bulbs in my studio lights inside of like 30 seconds. So I think maybe the fitting's dead. It's basically, it's like, how can you get psyched up to give a talk and not do this? But it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Where did you go away?
We just went close to home, just to a Center Parcs.
What, as in the UK?
No, in the Netherlands.
Oh, they're all over the shop, Center Parcs. I always used to think there was just one, but I didn't know they were like a chain.
No, there's loads. You got Center Parcs in, was it Belgium, Germany, in Holland? So it was actually really nice, and I double booked myself. So I was at a conference in America last week, so I had to kick the family out of the Center Parcs chalet. And I took my mobile camera, my mobile microphone with me, and actually gave a talk from a Center Parcs chalet last week with the beautiful greenery in the background instead of my normal Lego.
No, well, what you need to do is you need to take a photo of where you are just behind you, and then you can have the virtual background.
Just take that with me and just pretend where I am. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And I was checking out your Sessionize profile. Are you going to NDC, or are you doing that? Are you doing that all remotely?
No, I'm planning on going to NDC. I want to get to Oslo.
Oh wow! Well, that's November, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the end of November, beginning of December or so, and yeah, it's fingers crossed everything is still up for it at that time. There are so many speaker friends that I have not seen in person since like 2020, January 2020, February 2020, and it's going to be so nice to actually see them in person again.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the guys who I've been having as virtual speakers over the last year, I'm seeing all of them, elated with the fact that they're going to do face-to-face, which seems mental, because I've obviously I'll keep the names to myself, I don't want to jinx it, but someone who I've done an event with in the past has said, do you want to do it in this office space I've got? And I wasn't really sure whether people would be down for that, but I think people are kind of itching for it now, I guess.
I think people are looking forward to it again. I think you've got to make sure that you keep it safe. So a week tomorrow, I do my first face-to-face talk since January, February 2020 when I was in Stockholm. And it's going to be a hybrid event. So I believe there's a couple of hundred people can be there. It's in a massive cinema, so everybody can be spread out. But it's also a hybrid event as well.
Is that in the Netherlands, or is this one in Zurich, which I'm looking at?
No, that's in the Netherlands. Zurich's the week after.
But that is Zurich.
That is Zurich. That's getting on a plane and flying to a different country for the first time in an age. So I'm going to have to conquer my fear of flying again to get there.
Yeah, nice. I just saw someone put in the comments, we are recording, albeit as I said, this is the first time I've used Teams. Which seems blasphemous considering the context of the group. But yeah, this is going to be recorded. Hopefully I figure out how to get that recording not to, it won't be too difficult getting hold of it. But yeah, that goes up on the .NET to the Core YouTube channel. Was it Wednesday today? I'm sure I'll figure it out to go up online before the end of the week. But yeah, if you're ready to kind of kick things off, I know we didn't really have too much time to test the tech, but fingers crossed you can share your screen. We can kind of
fingers crossed. Let's see what happens, shall we?
Yeah, Marcia, once once I've put up the link, I'll share it amongst everyone. But if you do search .NET to the core, either on, I don't know, my meetup, the links in there. YouTube, it's pretty difficult to find, but it's floating around. But yeah, I will share the link after this. But yeah, I'll hand over shortly over to Stace to introduce herself. I'm not very good at introductions because I'm always reading verbatim off of a Sessionize or an MVP profile. Stacy Cashmore doesn't sound like she's Dutch, but she's been in the Netherlands for the last 15, 16 years.
22 years now.
22 years, Jesus, yeah. So a long time. Still hasn't got the accent. But close enough. Everyone speaks English over in the Netherlands. Stacy is I think a 2 times Microsoft MVP. I think you got another one this year, if I'm not mistaken.
It arrived the day we got back from vacation. I've not opened it yet because I want to do an opening video, but I've got to get my studio set up for that. But yeah, nice. I'm so absolutely thrilled to get that. I still can't believe I got it once. To have it twice is kind of like just absolutely floating.
No, it's well deserved. You've been in the space as your MVP profile says since the mid-90s developing software, and you're a very, very busy person in the realm of conducting talks like this, either on YouTube where you've got loads of stuff which I've seen, and yeah, I know you're very busy over the range of the years. We mentioned going off to face-to-face meetups. Yeah, we've got it virtually. If this is your first time coming to one of these sessions, which I see a lot of usual people in the crowd, the way we tend to do it is I'll hand over to Stacy to do the talk. Throughout the end, we'll go have like a bit of a Q&A session, so anything which you've noticed throughout the session we'll read out towards the end for her to answer, unless of course Stacy wants to do that ad hoc. The comment box is public, so just remember to keep yourself muted, keep your cameras off, but throw in all the questions as they come into your head while Stacy does her talk. So I'll stop yammering on, and I'll hand over to Stace to go from here and talk about pair programming. Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much. And well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us here today. Now, I love working with my colleagues. Seems a weird way to start off talking on pair programming, but bear with me here. Basically, I love bouncing ideas between each other and using or complementing each other's knowledge and using those combined talents to solve complex business or technical challenges. Basically, I adore working in close-knit teams. Unfortunately, that really hasn't happened as often as I would have liked it to. All too often, I have seen team members working on different things. It might be different stories in the same project. Sometimes it's even been completely different projects. Everybody is working on something different so that they can be, in some cases, because they have to be, independent from each other. And I find that an interesting word, independent, especially when we're talking about a team situation. Because in these situations, are we even a team at all? Or are we simply a collection of colleagues working independently at the same island of desks? And that word, independent, it has costs associated with it. You don't get it for free. Inside of my team, I now have way less insight into what my fellow team members are doing. Outside of that 15-minute stand-up in the morning where everybody is talking about completely different things, where you zone out after 30 seconds because it doesn't relate to you in any way, shape, or form. Outside of that, I don't know what other people are working on. And because of that disconnect, because that connection is lost between the team members, even if we're a really close team otherwise, bouncing ideas around, trying to help each other, it all becomes really hard. Because when we try to bounce those ideas around, when we try to help each other, it means we have to context switch, go out of what we're doing. One or other of us has to interrupt our flow. And it gives the teams other issues as well. If everybody's working independently, then we have way more work in progress. Every story takes longer to complete because there's only one person working on it. And they work on it then for a longer time, of course. And the likelihood after that is that each team member is going to get their own set of stories. And these all going together give us issues regarding resilience. Because when everybody has their own area, what happens when somebody wins a lottery and they quit the next day? Or maybe more likely they go on vacation for 2 weeks because we're in the middle of the summer. Or even if they just fall ill for a few days. All of these things interrupt our ability to provide value to our customers in a timely fashion. But I'm talking about pair programming, and I've not really touched on that yet. So why do I think these are connected? Well, one way that I've found of helping teams not fall into being independent colleagues at the same island of desks is to pair program. When we do this right, we get to work together, and I mean really together, to think of those better solutions, to encourage that better collaboration, and to implement them with less lead time. Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore. I've been a software developer since the mid-1990s. I am currently Tech Explorer DevOps at Omniplan in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and I'm a Microsoft MVP for developer technologies. I'm still so psyched about that. Now, over my career, I have worked in various different industries, companies, roles. And throughout all of that time, I have seen lots of different ways that teams can work together. I've got to say, some are better than others. My previous job, I had the honor of working there for 14 years. I started back in 2006, and at that time, everybody was individuals. In fact, on day one, I got my first project as an individual to implement a complex algorithm in the middle of part of our product. There were some bigger projects. They had more people, but there were still individuals working on the different facets. There wasn't really a cohesive team working together. And we saw the issues that this brought, all of the things that I've mentioned. We had issues when somebody had their own specialist area, lots of work in progress. Things didn't progress as we were expecting. And to try and help this, we introduced Scrum in 2012. We split up into teams rather than just being those individuals. And as a team, we were supposed to work on one project. It still gave us problems. We got questions coming out of the teams with this of how can we all work on the same project? We're changing the same code base, the same pages. Sometimes we're changing the same files. We are in merge hell. It's slowing us down. We can't do this. Well, fast forward from 2012 to when I left in 2020, and the teams had different experiments that they tried to do to find those better ways of working. The last team I worked with, we were constantly experimenting, trying all sorts of different things, trying to find the thing that worked for us as individuals in our team. And pair programming became a huge part of this. And it was an amazing learning experience. It took a lot of effort, but it paid dividends back on that effort. Not only for us as developers, but for the team and for the company as well. So at this point, I always like to say, if I'm saying it's so awesome, then why is it still such a uncommon thing to talk about and do. Why isn't everybody just doing it? And basically, when I talk to people and I ask them why they're not doing it, I get, but that's just wasting our time. 2 developers, 1 machine, you're not going to produce twice as much code. Ergo, it's pointless. Because obviously, as a developer, my goal in life is to produce as many lines as possible. Now, weirdly enough, I don't only get this answer from companies that I've spoken to where I've tried to introduce it. I also get it from developers when I've asked if they've tried it. And the problem is, going by my personal experience, all too often, they're actually right. You see, whilst I think pair programming is fantastic, there's a few things which, if they happen, it makes pairing less than great. And I want to talk about the most common. First one is what I call sleepy pairing. Now, if you've ever seen pairing in teams starting with pair programming, I am sure you've seen this. You've got one person, they're sitting behind the keyboard. They are feverishly typing away. They are working through the problem, coming up with a solution. They're fighting that solution when it doesn't do quite what they want it to do. They turn all that into code and they put it into the computer. Then you've got the second person in the pair, doing generally one of 2 things. Maybe they're sitting silently, looking over the shoulder of the person typing, making that person feel really uncomfortable. Or maybe that person is a meter or so away and they're kind of distracted. Maybe they're playing with their phone. And occasionally they look up at the screen and they go, yep, before returning to Facebook, Twitter, shooting zombies in an MMO. And I liken this to a long car journey. You have the driver. They're concentrating the whole day. They're looking for traffic problems. They're trying to figure out which way they need to go. And they're watching the road, trying to keep everybody safe. Then we have our passengers. Maybe you've got that annoying backseat driver just staring at you driving the whole trip, making you feel really bad. Maybe you've got that one person who just spends the whole trip looking out of the window, watching the world go by. And maybe you've got someone who's just lucky enough not to have motion sickness and they are just watching Netflix on their phone until the battery gives out. At the end of the journey, your driver, they get out of the car, they stretch, they walk inside, they hope there's somewhere to recuperate. They're exhausted. They've been concentrating for so long, they've got a headache. All they want to do is close their eyes. The passengers, meanwhile, well, they're also probably tired, but more from boredom than anything else. And so it is with our developers in sleepy pairing. That person doing the heavy lifting at the keyboard, they're more tired than they normally would have been. They have had exactly the same workload, only now they've had somebody watching every key press they do, without actually getting any help from them, just feeling judged. And that person sitting watching over the shoulder, don't underestimate how tiring it can be watching somebody else code. But at the same time, they finish the day feeling they've not really used their time wisely. And that person a meter away, they have an awesome score in their zombie game. They've also got that gnawing feeling that they should have been doing more. Either one of them feels useless because of this. So the next day, they return to their own machines. Assuming that they can return to the office, then they're going to stick on their noise-cancelling headphones, drown out the open plan, and go back to working independently. Previous day, complete waste of time. And you know what? So is pairing. That's one issue that we can have. But it's not only the navigator that can be sleepy, the drivers can be sleepy too, and the results are just as bad. I've seen this happen several times when teams start using the driver navigator roles in order to help them. You have the driver. They have the keyboard. They are entering the code. You have the navigator. They're solving the problem and telling the driver what to do. Now, doing this can have instant benefits. That sleepy person watching that has to take the navigator role, Well, neither the yupper nor the zombie killer can do either of these things anymore. They have to be actively involved. Because if they are not actively involved, the driver can't drive. So we get both parties doing something, working together, solving problems, navigator coming up with ideas, figuring out how to solve the problems, the driver listening to that solution and then putting it in at the keyboard. Kind of sounds like the idyllic working together that I want. People around the typist are being actively involved. No more yupping and no more zombies. Only I'm not too sure. My experience, there's still a zombie at this point. It's just not in that MMO game on the phone. It is the typist. And I'm using that word deliberately, typist, sitting, banging in the words that the navigator tells them to do. But while they're doing this, they're not thinking about what they're typing into the computer. Have you ever seen stories about drivers who take their satellite navigation systems too literally? They end up at the wrong destination. Because they take everything the system says without thinking, they end up lost in the middle of a field, stuck between two houses in a narrow lane that they should never have driven down. In the worst cases I've seen, in water or even in the wrong country. The navigation system says, you have arrived. And the driver thinks, well, maybe, but arrived where? How did I get here? And why are my feet wet? And with our developers now at the end of that day, both of them are now completely exhausted. The navigator that's done all of the thinking, only they've now been doing this thinking while they've been held up by the typist, with the typist taking an age to do something, not using the shortcuts that they know could reduce the amount of time that it takes to enter this code. But they can't carry on with their thoughts and their solutions because then they're going to be disconnected from the driver and they're going to get lost. And the typist, bashing the keys with no thought, they're exhausted. Yesterday they were exhausted because they did all of the heavy lifting. Now they're exhausted with someone telling them to put if statements on line 42 and curly braces on line 43. They didn't become a developer just to put somebody else's words into a computer, not including Stack Overflow, of course. So the next day, they return to their own machines. They put on their noise-cancelling headphones, cancel out the open plan office if they can get there, and they go back to working independently. Each of them feels the previous day was a complete waste. And you know what? Except for maybe really complex problems, so is pairing in general. Now with these two issues, the sleepy driver, the sleepy navigator, I've seen teams find it very hard to continue and get past this point. My experience has been you reach this stage multiple times every time you try and do pair programming, and then you stop because you can't quite break through. They're also used as some of the biggest reasons for companies or developers to say it's not even worth it, it's too costly to even try to pair, to give up before they start. But there are things that we can do to help this situation, to make it so that pairing not only works, but it also pays dividends on that huge amount of effort that it needs to make it work. So before I tell you what I found worked for the teams that I was working in, I want to give you a little bit of a story about how my team got from that sleepy driver, that sleepy navigator, and into something better. See, when I say that it can be better, quite often I just get, yeah, right, sure. Well, like I say, we struggled as a team as well. We skirted with the sleepy navigator a few times. We skirted with driver navigator with sleepy drivers a few times. We never really managed to achieve that close-knit team that I was looking for. What actually got us into doing good pair programming was an afternoon where we weren't even trying to do pair programming. It was just something where pair programming seemed to be the default state, so we did it. See, as a team, we wanted to experiment with TDD, test-driven development. And we wanted to spend an afternoon trying it out on something simple and not doing it in complex old legacy code. And so we had an afternoon workshop. Had 4 developers, but because we didn't want to upset people in the open plan office, because we didn't want to be upset by others in the open plan office, and basically because we wanted to hide so we could just be not interrupted, we got a meeting room. 4 developers, 1 room. That meeting room had limitations: 1 machine, 1 screen, and 1 keyboard and mouse. The fact that we were going to be using that room meant we had to live with those facilities. There's nothing else for it. We are going to have to pair to get through the workshop. So we started with the driver navigator. Because we'd already done the sleepy navigator, we knew we had to have some involvement. But as the workshop got underway, we noticed that we were trying different things. As different sets of knowledge became important, the process evolved. Firstly, everybody actually started to be actively involved, even the people furthest away from the keyboard who, I'm going to admit, until that point, were maybe a little bit sleepy. But because everybody was trying to learn, if your attention was diverted for more than a couple of seconds, you missed something important from somebody else. Not only that, we needed the skills of that team member in order to fill in the gaps in our knowledge so that we could continue. And over the course of a couple of hours, we just kind of slipped into strong pair programming, naturally, just because of what we were doing. Suddenly we're giving ideas to the driver, and the driver is arguing back, and we're working through these things. This happened especially when somebody had misunderstood something and we needed to discuss it, to bounce those ideas to help each other. We came out of that afternoon buzzing with excitement about how that whole afternoon had gone. The things that we'd deliberately learned about TDD, but also the things we'd unwittingly learned about pairing at the same time. Everybody agreed this was a fantastic session, and we wanted that feeling in our day-to-day work. So we decided that as of the following day, we were going to reintroduce pair programming into our normal work in our normal office. We'd seen how it could work in that special situation, and we wanted that feeling daily in our lives. So the next morning we came in, we were ready to go. We were excited, we were full of energy, and sleepy pairing. Immediately, completely, totally sleepy pairing. Kind of a letdown for everybody. That workshop had gone so well. But on the other hand, that workshop had gone so well, so we knew that it could work, so we didn't give up this time. We knew what we wanted from it, we knew what we could get from it, so we started to actively look at what was causing us the problems. First thing that we tackled was the issue we had with our sleepy navigator. When we started to pair, we noticed that the world is full of distractions, especially our phones. Most of us are addicted to our phones. I know that I am. And they provide a world of dopamine and distractions for us. Email, Slack, Teams, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, TikTok. And if you're not busy dancing your fingers across a keyboard, it is so easy to give into the distraction and allow yourself to pick up your phone. Normally, when I give this talk in person, around now, 1 or 2 people look up from their phones with a little bit of a guilty look on their face because it's that easy to go into it. Now, it took a lot of mental energy to remove this distraction. It took me an amount of different things to remove the distraction. First thing that I tried was putting it on the desk next to me so that I couldn't simply glance at it and it was out of eyesight. That didn't work. All that happened is I knew it's over there, so I stretched to pick it up, checked it, and stretched to put it back. Great for the daily workout, not so good for removing a distraction. Eventually, I knew that I just had to get rid of it completely. Having that phone on the desk when I was pair programming was bad. So I tossed it away back onto my desk when I was pairing with somebody else. Carefully, it's a glass smartphone. It's not a Nokia 3210. And it hurt. It felt really awful. Like I say, I know I'm addicted to my phone. But after a while, it worked. That pain went away. I could concentrate better than before. Most of the things I was checking, they're not urgent. Twitter, WhatsApp. It's just fear of missing out. It's just habit of what I was doing. The email issue, on the other hand, that took a bit more time to get through to my head. You see, when I'm working at my own machine, if an important email comes in, I can see it, and I appreciate that's also bad. When working at somebody else's, it came to my phone, and I could see it. If I don't have my phone with me, if my phone's on silent, how do I know if somebody has an urgent question that desperately needs answering? How do I know if we've got a major issue? How do I know if production's on fire and the website's down? What happens if I need to do something and I'm not checking my email and I can't see this? I didn't get those emails when I'm pairing. But after a while, start to realize, you know what, this is kind of fine. If something is that urgent that me not reading my email is a problem, somebody's going to come and get me. And if they don't come and get me, let's face it, it's not that much of a problem. So working to remove the distractions, we could get more into the flow, we could work better as a pair, but we still needed to take care of that sleepy driver. And we figured out that the way to do this was to reevaluate the definitions that we came up with for the driver and the navigator. So we have our navigator, somebody who thinks of a solution, and they explain it to the driver until the driver understands the solution enough to write the code themselves. And the driver, somebody who listens to the navigator, who tries to understand what the navigator is trying to explain and can turn that understanding into code, and when they don't understand, to not do anything. Returning to our driving metaphor one last time. When you're driving, your job is not to listen to the satellite navigation system and just to do what it tells you without thinking. Your job is to take those instructions, to think about them, check that they're right, check that it's safe to use them, and get to the right place safely. And so it is with the driver in pair programming. It's not just somebody who follows the instructions that the navigator says, it's somebody who listens to the navigator, tries to understand what they are trying to achieve, and if you don't understand, not code anything. And the navigator, they need to make sure that the driver understands. And when that understanding isn't there, they need to make sure that they can explain it differently. What you don't do is grab the keyboard and quickly do something. Because as soon as you do that, you are back in sleepy pairing with one person doing nothing more than watching what's going on. Now, rather, you explain it to the driver again. And if you're running out of ideas, you go to a whiteboard and you draw on the whiteboard and use whatever tools you have to make sure that the driver understands what he needs to do. And when the driver's working through this solution from the navigator and they suddenly get it, they start to get excited. They know what they need to do next. You know how you're going to solve the problem. At this point, you don't just start typing. You don't put your undoubtedly awesome solution into the computer. Rather, you excitedly give that keyboard to the navigator. You tell them about your amazing idea and you switch roles. You are now the navigator. They are now the driver. Because again, if you have an idea and you just start to put that into the computer, you lose your navigator. They're no longer involved in the process. They're not coming up with the solution and they're not putting it into the computer. They go back to sleep. If we do this, if we ensure that each person fulfills the roles in this way, without distraction, being an active member of the pair, then we can move from sleepy pairing and into strong pairing. Now, I personally think that this is awesome But everything I've said so far has been a little bit referenced about being in the office. And when was the last time we were all in the office working together? So let's talk remote for a few minutes. Now, in 2020, I gave this talk at a conference in Stockholm. And at the same conference, I was lucky enough to be a guest on .NET Rocks, talking about it. Now, the presentation was absolutely focused on real life interactions there. There was no remoting there at all. And then at one point, either Carl or Richard asked me, so what about pairing remotely? Well, that was a curveball for me. It's not something I'd spent much time thinking about back then, which if you ever listen back to the episode, I think you'll get. Basically, I went, well, I've done it once and it worked kind of well. My colleague and I were busy pairing in the morning, but I needed to be at home in the afternoon. We didn't have audio or video because our machines weren't set up for that. So we were communicating through Slack, through text messages, through Notepad on a shared screen. And it was hard, but it worked. Even in that situation, we managed to make it work. But I did follow it up with a proviso. I thought it would only work if you build up psychological safety in person before you start to pair. See, when you pair program, you have to allow your faults to be visible, and you have to accept that you're going to be told when you make mistakes and you're going to misunderstand things and have discussions. And if you don't have psychological safety with the person you're pairing with, that is really hard. Now, me and my colleague, we had that. We had an awesome working relationship already. We paired often in real life. In fact, we paired too often in real life because we had such a good click that we naturally gravitated to each other and we could bounce off of each other's. So those hardships offered by the woefully inadequate situation we had didn't hit us too hard. But I wouldn't like to do it with somebody that I'd never paired with in person before. I don't think I can do this without the safety net. It's going to be super hard with loads of challenges. I said this 3 weeks before lockdown came in the Netherlands. Yes. And at the time, I was also changing jobs. I literally got back from that Stockholm conference and the next day started in a new office. And those 3 weeks where we could actually see each other, I'm going to be honest, I spent them infuriating my colleagues as well as getting to know them. I was there to help them improve and to try and bring about some process change. And let's face it, nobody likes that. I don't think I was well liked in those first few weeks. And then suddenly, we're all working from home. All these people that were working individually in the office before are now behind their desks in their rooms by themselves. And to my surprise, they actually all started trying to pair. Some teams even tried to mob remotely without building up that trust level first. And you know what? It still kind of worked. The team started to enjoy their pairing sessions. I think one of the things that it gave them in this remote world is a connection with their colleagues. Ordinarily, they would have been eating lunch with their colleagues. They would have been having coffee with their colleagues. Now they don't have any of that, and they wanted that connection. Now, it did give other challenges, which I'm going to go through now, because I think in COVID times, and hopefully with the more hybrid working we're going to have when it's all over, I think a talk on pairing needs a remoting section. Firstly, if you are pairing remotely, sleepy pairing is so much harder to avoid. The whole team has to work hard to make sure that everybody stays engaged, because it is so easy when remote that you just tune out because you're in different locations. People disappear from the session. They're still in the call, but they're not joining in, but also not being noticed in a way that it would be if they were sitting at the desk with you. Maybe they've gone on mute without you noticing, turned the video off without you noticing. They don't feel they have anything to contribute, so they just sink into the back. They're watching a screen, which is maybe a blurred, shrunken code window. And like I say, in the office, when this happens, you can do something to try and spark that energy back. Suggest a walk, a break, a drink. And you can't physically see the other person. you don't spot that quite so easily. The other thing that doesn't happen quite so often as we'd like is switching roles. Because when you're sitting next to each other, switching roles is really easily. You literally take the keyboard or mouse and you continue. When you're not sitting next to each other, it can be so much harder. Either you're sharing a screen and you have to take over the session, so you're now looking at that blurry, shrunken code window, using somebody else's theme, somebody else's keyboard settings, trying to figure out what's going on. Or you need to commit your code, push it to the repo, have the other person pull it, open the solution, and then continue working. And all of that is a context switch. It makes it harder to remember why you were switching roles in the first place. And so we don't do it as often as we should. And this also kind of feeds back into that sleepy room, the one person driving all morning and everybody else falling asleep. We also noticed it's harder to bounce ideas between each other because we're only doing them on voice. When you're in a Teams call and you've got two people talking, how hard is it to understand them? It's bad enough when you're in a physical room. If you're in a Teams call and two people talk, forget it. It's not happening. And body language. You can see my head and my shoulders via the camera, but you still don't get to see my entire body language. Some people sit very stiffly when they're on camera because, you know, it's kind of really puts you on the spot and you spend all day looking like this. Or maybe you just don't like the camera at all and you just turn it off and then you really can't see that person. Makes it so much harder to bounce between each other. Now, to help us solve some of these things, we tried various things. One thing we tried that I really want to share with you is live share. The experience has been interesting. Sometimes it has been phenomenally awesome, and sometimes it has been profanity-inducing annoyance. But when it works, it really is great because I'm no longer looking at somebody else's widescreen plus monitor on my display. They're no longer looking at my 4K monitor on their HD plus widescreen monitor. Let's face it, neither of those is a fun experience. I am now using my monitor, my Visual Studio, my setup with my extensions and my keyboard mappings, and I can take over the second I need to take over without having that content switch. If we couldn't use live share, then we tried to force these movements. And we did that using the Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes, and then we switched drivers. It isn't perfect, but it at least made sure that everybody has to stay in the zone and they have to pay attention because you know what? You're going to be taking over in a minute. Not perfect, but it helped. Finally, the one that really helped, and it also helps in real life, is making sure that you always keep that devil's advocate in your brain. When you're pairing, even if you completely agree with the other person, you should be asking tough questions just to make sure you've not missed something. You're not going down a blind alley. You're not blinkered because you are there with the other person and you're both on the same wavelength. Doing all of this, it's still harder than it is in the office. I'm not going to lie. And we are nowhere near perfect. But if you can get the discipline up there, it still works amazingly well and it still gives dividends back on the effort that it takes to make it work. For a few of our teams, it is now, even after 18 months or more, their default way of working remotely, and they even plan on carrying on doing this when they come back to the office. They've seen the benefits. So what are those benefits? Well, the first, most obvious one is collaboration. When we're pairing, we are working together. We are really coming up with a solution to a problem as a whole. We're not working on different things. We're doing one thing until it's finished and then moving on to the next. We have to bounce those ideas between each other. We use our joint talents to solve those problems together, and we help each other improve. Whether that is with our knowledge of the domain space, our knowledge of the architecture we're using, our knowledge of the frameworks that we're using. We're working together and we're pulling each other up. We also notice that we communicate a lot more and far better. And why is a little bit chicken and egg for me? I'm honestly not sure if we improved our ability to communicate, and so we improved our ability to pair program, or if we learned to pair program and our communication just organically evolved as we did. Either way, like I say, our communication is better since we've been doing this. And it means that we are sharing knowledge so much better than we used to, and so much more often than we used to. And that means that when that person wins a lottery and quits the next day, goes on vacation over the summer, or is just ill for that day, it isn't the same problem that it used to be. Because when we're pairing, there's always one other person with knowledge of what's going on, the other person in the pair. And they can continue, bring in a new person, start a new pair, and share the knowledge yet again. We also noticed that our pull requests became so much smoother and simpler. Because when we did it right, and I'll come to this in a second, our pull request just became an ongoing process. As a driver, I'm validating the thoughts of the navigator as they leave their head, real time. And the navigator's validating the code that I'm producing, again, real time. So that when we came to make our pull requests, which in a pair with that devil's advocate mindset, we managed to keep more or less manageable and smaller, we double-checked the changes that we were making, and we made that commit and pull request. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second because this bit is really important. If you are pairing and keeping an eye on the code that you are producing in your pair, you cannot skip this step, because if you do, you'll be amazed at the things that slip in, even though both of you think you know what's going on. And like I say, we just make sure nothing snuck in without us noticing. We then make the PR, and the navigator will go to their computer and approve it. Our old pull request was a way different thing. You'd finish something, you throw it out for review, maybe disturbing the person, saying, hey, can you look at this for me when you got time? Already context switching for them because they need to talk to you. Then when they have time, they look at it again, more context switching. They add comments, they send it back to you, and then you have to context switch from what you're doing now to what you were doing then. And this ping pongs backwards and forwards until you get a pull request that you can approve. Doing it constantly as we go, the only context switch that we actually have is when we switch tasks at the end. And you know what? That's kind of an acceptable context switch. We also noticed that our code quality improved, like I say, as long as you keep an eye on what you're doing, as I was just saying. You see, we're all unique. We all have our unique strengths. We all have our unique weaknesses. Coding's not exempt from this. And when pairing, you take your weaknesses into the pair. Your partner takes their weaknesses into the pair. They're both unique. Chances are that the overlap's reasonably small. You get to catch the potential mistakes from your partner's weakness. Your partner gets to catch your potential mistakes from your weaknesses. The only ones that really make it through are the ones that live in that overlap. And it allows you to produce that better quality code as you go, because you're catching things at the time that it happens and not at a later stage when it's so much harder to change. Of course, we don't only bring our weaknesses with us, we bring our strengths with us too. And using these strengths, we can build each other up. Like I say, not only do we manage to help each other improve, but you also get that built-in rubber duck, so that if you have that really hard problem, whether or not it's new code, whether or not it's a bug that you just can't seem to get plastered down, rather than fighting it for hours or days and hitting your head against a wall, you've got a second person working with you, and you can use your joint strengths to solve that problem. Chances are you're going to be able to solve it before you start pulling your hair out. So, like I say, by using our unique strengths and our unique weaknesses, we can improve each other and our code base, use that rubber ducking, and leave the world a better place than we found it. And the final benefit that I want to mention, which kind of surprised me a little bit, was with our onboarding process. We started to work new developers and new testers directly in a pair. And it was a change. I mean, normally when you start a new job, it's a daunting task. You turn up into a room where you don't know anybody. You get introduced to loads of people whose names you instantly forget. You get a machine, a big stack of paperwork or a big stack of links that you need to go through. And you spend time trying to learn the domain, the system, trying to be productive. On some systems, this can take weeks or more before you're really up and running. Rather than doing that, put that new person together with an existing person. Get them to pair together. The newbie gets all of the insights and experience of the code base, of the domain, of the framework from their partner that they're working with. And your partner gets that clear insight that only somebody with no preconceived thoughts about a project can bring to it. And they're productive from day one. Now, I get asked why I get so energetic and hyper when I talk about pair programming. Why do I advocate it so much? And I like to paraphrase G. Paul Hill from Twitter here when he's talking about test-driven development. I advocate pair programming because we are in this for the money. Because pair programming, when practiced, when done right, can get value into the hands of our users quicker. It can get that value there with more thought put into it. Not only how it works, but also how it's built and how we can keep it running in the future. And getting that value there earlier is what pays your salary. I love pairing with one or with multiple people. I love it because of the benefits that I see that it's brought to the teams I've done it with, as an individual, for the teams, and for the company. Make no mistake, pair programming is hard. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it already. But I invite you to give it a go. Put that effort in at the start to get through those sleepy stages. See what benefits it can bring you back. I've been Stacy Cashmore. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Stacy. That was great. We had a few questions come in, I think, throughout the session, but I think you might have answered them throughout. I think Marvin mentioned that Visual Studio had a feature called Live Share that might work well. So thought potentially you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, like Live Share, it's something I mentioned halfway through. My experience, like I said in the talk, it's been interesting. At the times where it's worked, it has been absolutely fantastic, but we've never managed to get it working 100% of the time perfectly. So in some sessions, everybody's had to restart their computers a few times. It keeps on dropping connection. It's crashed machines. It's crashed Visual Studio. When it does that, we just go back to sharing screens again and living with the downsides that brings. But when it does work, it's spectacular. I hope they continue to improve that. I'm looking forward to what happens with Visual Studio 2022 when that's released, and see whether or not that's even better. It's definitely something that's worth looking into.
So this is a personal question from me, because I was really interested in your pair programming talk, because being a recruiter, I've got roles to fill, and some people have opinions on aspects of a role which some people have, some people haven't. And I was recently working with a client who were really they were massive advocates of pair programming, and some people rear up and they're like, no, I don't want to do that at all. I actually ended up speaking to a guy who he thought they did it too much. I think this client, they did like 80 or 90% of all work in pairs. And I was wondering, as someone who's an advocate for pair programming, do you think is there a level? Can it be done too much, do you think?
As far as the work itself goes, honestly, no, I don't. But it takes a lot of energy. So you've got to make sure that you give yourselves enough breaks. If you're pair programming for 8 hours a day, you're just going to be absolutely exhausted when you finish. So you need to make sure that you can give yourself enough time to recuperate during the day. Maybe go and answer your emails. Maybe do some research on a new thing that you want to do. If you've got a problem that both of you are struggling with, split apart and do your own research and then come back together. Make sure that you can do something to keep those energy levels up. One thing that I've been told by a few people is pair programming, it's only for complex stuff, because when you're doing simple stuff, you don't need two developers to make simple changes to, say, the text in a HTML page or just some simple functions. At that point, you're really wasting the developer time. And my counterpoint for that is the context switching. When we started doing it in my last company, the person I was doing it with, even when we had simple tasks like add this text to the screen, you don't need to pair program that, obviously. However, the fact that we were doing this meant that when it came to doing those pull requests, they were fired off in seconds, as opposed to this simple change lying in the pull request list for hours, waiting for somebody to approve the change before it could go into the trunk to, so that it could be deployed. So it's kind of a no, you absolutely don't need to pair on the simple things. And if you've just got a whole list of simple things, then maybe at that point you want to get together and say, how do we want to handle this? But if you've got a simple thing coming through with the complex things, pair it anyway, just because it cuts out that context switching and you can continue. You're on mute, Luke.
Yeah. Well done. And you're the one drinking, not me. Yeah.
It's no communal. It's not the hard stuff yet.
Not yet. Big plans for this evening. No. I was going to say the comment section has been mostly thank yous and kind words as opposed to too many questions. So I presume you've been very informative throughout the last hour. So yeah, thank you, Stacy. Thank you, everyone, which has got to this point. You'll notice on the .NET to the Core meetup page, there's not anything as it stands booked in. That doesn't mean there's nothing in the background. There are a few things to go up, and I did allude on email that around November time, there's something big which I'm announcing. I think Microsoft are announcing something in November. I can't remember, but it'll be centered around that. So I'll see you at the next one. Thank you again, Stacy. And
thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody for taking the time to listen.
Sweet. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll see you all at the next one. Cheers.
Yeah, bye.